So I do want to thank everyone for being with us, especially folks who are caught up in the events, taking time out and getting our getting ourselves centered around what is truly important in this life. Is probably one of the greatest things that we can do while everybody else is caught up in the drama. So what we want to talk about today, this is something that comes around every once in a while. The idea comes around, and the title of today's talk is "Use It or Lose It." Use it or lose it. You know, and there are many things in life that we have to continually use, or we will lose them. And when I was thinking about it, when the ideas started to come to me, ideas surrounding this talk, what came to me was a passage in the New Testament that I refer to as the parable of the talents, Talents. And you might remember this one. It's often quoted. The moral of the story, the tagline, is often quoted. We'll get to that in just a second. But the story as it goes is that there was a rich man, excuse me, who was going off on a journey, and he called in his servants, and he gave each of them talents. Now, talents was a sum of money, apparently a very large sum of money, like 20 years' wages or something like that. But he gave them each some talents, and we're told that he gave to each of them according to their ability. And he went off on it. He told them to take care of it, and he went off on his trip. And the one servant was given 5 talents and went out and quickly started to invest the money and doubled it in a short time. So he had the 5 plus another 5. And then the next servant went out. He had received 2 talents, and he went out and he invested these 2 talents, and he too doubled them. He had a total of 4 talents. But the third servant was afraid. He was afraid that if he went and used the talents that the master had given to him, he might lose them. You know, he might invest poorly, and he was afraid that he would draw the wrath of his master by losing the talent. So he took the 1 talent that was given to him, and he took it and he buried it in the ground where he knew it would be safe. Remember, in those days they had what we refer to lovingly here in rural America as post hole banks. So the farmers would take one fence post out of their fence line, and they would leave enough slack in the barbed wire that they could lift the fence up. And at the bottom of that hole, that's where they would put their valuables in a mason jar or some box of some sort. They would put them down that hole, and then they would put the fence post over it. And it was not much different in those days. Remember the thing about don't bury your treasure in the earth. That's what people did. They went out and they buried their stuff in a secret place. So this man went out and he buried his talents in the ground. And after some time, the master returned, and he called the servants in for their accounting. And the one said, "Well, you gave me 5, and I invested them, and I made another 5. So here's your 10." And the master, of course, said, "Oh, well done, well done." And the other one said, "Well, you gave me 2, and I invested, and here's another 2." And the master says, "Oh, well done, well done." And the other one comes up and he says, "Well," he says, "you gave me 1, and I know you've got a terrible temper, and you would be really upset with me if I lost that 1. So rather than take a chance that I would lose it, what I did was I buried it in the ground. And sure enough, here it is. I didn't lose any of it, but here's back the 1 talent that you gave." And in the parable, the rich man becomes very angry, and he yells at this man, and he says, "You didn't use what I gave you. You didn't take what I gave you, and you didn't use it. That's terrible." So he took the 1 talent that the man had away from him and gave it to the one that had 10. And this is the tagline, the moral of the story that people remember. And it goes something to the effect, it changes on which translation you read, but it goes something to the effect that to the ones that have, more will be given, and to the ones that don't have, it shall be taken away. And it's kind of an interesting parable, And of course, scriptures like the ink blot test, people read into it what's in them, and they read back out. So if you go on the internet where course, everything you read must be true. And if you go on the internet and you start to look at different interpretations of this, there is a wide gamut. There's a wide gamut of how people explain this. Everything from justifying, if you will, the top 1%, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It says so right here in the Bible, you see. To them that have more will be given, and to those that don't have it will be taken away. To people talking about, well, this refers to the end of time, that God's going to come back at the end of time, and if we didn't study hard and we didn't work hard and all these things, then we're going to be yelled at too. So when I look at it, what I get out of it is use it or lose it. Use it or lose it. Right? Remember when we were talking about the Ten Commandments, we were talking about by right of consciousness, by right of consciousness. Emmett Fox told us the commandment, thou shalt not steal, meant that you cannot have anything in your life that doesn't belong there by right of consciousness. That if you try to get and to hold on to someone or something, and you don't have the consciousness for it, you will lose it. You will lose it. It will be taken away from you, but it won't be taken away from you in terms of a punishment. It will be taken away from you because it didn't belong to you in the first place. You see, it wasn't yours by right of consciousness. In our day, if you watch, every once in a while there's a story on the news that tells us about people who had a great windfall. They were living in poverty and they won the lottery and they got $1 bazillion from the lottery, and they went out and they bought houses and they bought yachts and they bought cars and they gave money away. And in 5 years' time, they were just as broke or even more so than they were before. So it's an example of you cannot hold on to what is not yours by right of consciousness. You cannot go out and manipulate the world to try to get the world to give you something that is not yours by the right of consciousness. And Emmett Fox tells us also, he says, don't worry about people who seem to be defying the rules. I can't remember who it was that said nothing upsets a just man more than the success of the unjust, or something like that. We're told not to judge one another, and people sit around and they say, well, wait a second, this guy's a crook and he's making bazillions of dollars, and I work hard every day and barely make ends meet, And Emmett Fox says, don't worry about them. Don't worry about them. It's all by right of consciousness. And if they're trying to take something they don't have the consciousness for, they're causing themselves problems in some other way that you don't see. And it's none of your business anyway, so don't worry about it. But think of this parable then, to those that have, more will be given, and to those that don't have, it will be taken away from them. Think of it as explaining to us the law of mind by right of consciousness. By right of consciousness. If we take our understanding that life is a matter of consciousness, that it is literally done unto us according to our belief, that what we see in the material world is an outpicturing of the spiritual world or the world of consciousness, see, then we can start to understand, if I have the consciousness of something, the mental equivalent, as Emmett Fox would call it, if I have that, no one can take that mental equivalent away from me, see. And if I have that, I must, by the law of attraction, I must bring into my experience that which I have the mental equivalent for. And as I continue to use that ability, as I continue to develop that ability, as I continue to become more and more aware of who and what I am as a spiritual being, I will continue to attract more good things into my life. Now, this passage, as I say, has been used to discuss money, to discuss abundance in the terms of money. And that's only part of it, you see. We're not talking about just money. We're talking about all of the good things of life. And we're going to come to, in a minute, we're going to come and ask ourselves, well, what are the best things in life? And the best things in life, are they material things? Is it money? Or are they spiritual things? And if it is done unto me by right of consciousness, you see, then if I develop the consciousnness that I am a spiritual being, I am an expression of the divine. As Osho tells us, think of the ocean and the wave. Right? Everything that the wave is some part of the ocean. But the wave is not all of the ocean. But the wave is the ocean expressing itself as a wave. The ocean is waving at us through the wave. And the divine is expressing itself as each and every one of us. So each one of us is that point in expression where the divine is waving at itself as each and every other one. There's one light, and that light is shining through each and every one. And if we develop that consciousness, if we become aware of that truth, and we continue to develop that, then more shall be given. More consciousness shall be given. More awareness shall be given. And if we don't develop that consciousness, we'll lose it. We will not only not develop it, but what little we had, we will lose. What little we had will be taken away from us. Again, not because we're being punished, but just through atrophy, just through the lack of use, just through not doing it. So I want you to think in terms of human skills. You know, any skill that we have, whether it be a technical skill, you know, flying a plane, driving a car, playing an instrument, playing the sport, anything that we do, any skill that we have, we develop through practice, through doing it over and over and over again. And in doing it, getting the feedback, right? Getting the feedback that tells us whether the way that we did it this time was as good as last time or better than last time, so to speak. Years ago, I took a transfer and I took another job, and that job at the time, the gentleman who was running the office that I was in, who was the vice president over that regional office, he was a fantastic amateur golfer. I mean, he was, in my mind, he was always a frustrated pro golfer. If he could have done anything he wanted to do in his life, I think he would have been playing on the PGA. But he was in the business world. But he rose up to a position in the business world where playing golf was an important skill. You know, I don't know what it's like these days, but in those days, a lot of business was conducted on the golf course. And the key executives from different companies, the vendors and the purchasers, they lived on the golf course. They would buy fancy homes on the golf course, and they knew one another through the golf club, and they would go out and they would play golf. And of course, while they were playing around the golf, they would be discussing business. You know, so a lot of business deals were sealed on the golf course. And in my new position, I was starting to get invited to some of these, you know, some of these opportunities to go play golf with the customers. And of course, I didn't play golf. I didn't know how to play golf, never had played golf. So I went out and I took a few lessons, you know, and practiced a little bit, and was really just very, very poor at it. And I joined a league, and we would go out every Tuesday night, we would play. And it became very frustrating for me because I would go out and I would play at a level, and then I would go out, I wouldn't play for a while, and then I would go back out and I would play, and I had regressed. I wasn't as good as I was the time before, so I would spend half the game just trying to get into practice where I was as good as I was the week before. and then maybe I would just advance just a little bit on the final few holes, you know. So I said, there's got to be a better way. And of course, you know, with any sport, you can buy $1 billion worth of videotapes, instruction manuals, special clubs that'll stop you from slicing the ball, and all these kind of gimmicks. But I picked up a book by Jack Nicklaus, and I remember the title. It's called Golf My Way by Jack Nicklaus, and he was talking about how to learn how to play golf. And he said, what you want to do if you really want to learn is get a 5-iron. And the 5-iron he chose because that was the medium length club. You know, half the clubs are longer and half the clubs in the bag are shorter. So get the 5-iron, go down to the range, get a golf pro to give you a couple lessons. He says, and then keep going back to the range. Keep going back every day, several times a day. Keep going back to the range until you hit several thousand golf balls with the 5-iron. Until you can take the 5-iron and you can take a ball and you can put that ball anywhere on the range within the acceptable distance of a 5-iron. But when you can make that ball go anywhere you want to go with the 5-iron, which he said is going to take a couple thousand balls to hit, he said, then get another club, move to the 4 or to the 6. And do the same thing with that other club, and then move the other way, constantly going one longer, one shorter, one longer, one shorter, until you can take any club in your bag and you can hit the ball and put it anywhere on the range that you want it to go, again, within whatever the distance of that particular club is. He says, then you're ready to go start playing golf. And I'm thinking to myself, wow. Hit a couple thousand balls with each club in the bag until you can use any club and make the ball go anywhere you want it to go, and then you're ready to go start play golf. And I just put the book down and shook my head and I said, who has that time? Who has that money? You know, maybe for a young kid who was born up in an environment where he had plenty of access to a driving range and golf clubs, that you can do that. But who amongst us has the time to go out and do that? And I finally came to the point where I realized if that's what it takes to be good at it, I don't have the time to do that. I have to give it up. I have to just not even attempt to do it because I can't do it. I can't do it well. And my point is that the difference between the good players, between the excellent players, and between the weekend duffers, which is what I was that commitment to practice. Was that commitment to get out there and to do the things that were necessary in order to become better. And the reason that most of us are not as good as we want to be at a great many things, particularly the skill-based things, is we don't take the time to practice. We don't take the time to get better. So use it or lose it. Use it or lose it. So one way that we lose it is we just simply don't take the time. We just simply don't take the time to practice. And another way that we lose it is through mindlessness. Through mindlessness. We do things and we do them over and over and over again, but we never stop to pay attention to what we're doing. We do them out of habit. We do them for the most part the way that we learned to do them many, many years ago. And we never stop to call to mind, what is it that we're doing? Are we aware of what we are doing in the moment? Are we paying attention to what we are doing in the moment? Or are we just doing it? This week we spent some time with one of our grandsons who's getting ready to go for his driver's permit. Reading the books with him, answering questions with him, and while driving the car, kind of explaining things to him. And it's always an eye-opener when you have to do something like that, because you know the kind of questions that they can think of, because it's new, right? The Zen mind, the beginner's mind, is coming to them completely new, and they're asking questions that you and I we've driven for years, you know, and we never stop to ask ourselves, how do you know if you're going down a street the wrong way? How would you know? Other than the fact that everybody's coming at you blowing their horns. Suppose there's no cars there. How would you know? And of course, if you see two signs, one on each side of you that says wrong way, then you're going the wrong way. But if you only see one sign that says you're going the wrong way and it's to your left, well, then you're going the right way. Well, there's another way. The roads are painted so there's a white stripe on the right and a yellow stripe on the left. Those kind of things. But it forces us, if we're helping someone new, it forces us to stop and become aware of the things that we have learned how to do mindlessly. When I was reading a book one time on memory techniques, and the author was explaining how you can learn how to remember anything, virtually remember anything that you wanted or needed to remember through some very simple techniques that anyone can learn in a reasonable period of time. And in kind of explaining the techniques, what the author said is, it's not that we forget things. We go around and we say, well, I forgot where I put my keys, or I forgot this, or I forgot that. He says, it's not that we forgot it. He said, we weren't paying attention at all when we did it. We were not originally aware. We were not originally aware of what we were doing. We were doing it, and our mind was someplace else. And we put our keys down someplace other than where we usually put our keys down, and now we can't find them. But it's not because we forgot. It's because we never remembered in the first place. So to a large degree, the memory techniques that he was teaching were techniques to force us to be aware of what we were doing when we were doing it. And then to take those same techniques to reading or learning or trying to absorb new information, to find ways to become uniquely and originally aware of that data, and then to store it into our minds. So there's things that we don't use because we're mindless. There's things that we don't use just because our attention has gone other places. We all might like to be great tennis or golf players, but we've got our time and attention needs to go someplace else. And there are things that we simply lose because we're just not paying attention. We're just not even aware. We're just kind of going through the motions. So what does this have to do with our spiritual growth? Why is this a parable in the New Testament? This morning I got up and was kind of scrolling through the news feeds, and there was a bit of satire that someone put out there, and they were talking about how with the Pope's visit, Pope Francis's visit to the U.S. in the last couple of weeks, and with his reminding people about compassion and caring for the poor and loving one another and caring for our environment, that some of the political parties have complained, that he was against capitalism. He was attacking capitalism by repeating the very for some the very basic principles of Christianity. So the satirist who was doing the piece suggested that maybe the politicians needed to develop a new image of Jesus, the supply side Jesus, the Jesus who was more an objectivist than a Christian. Excuse me. But if you stop and think about it, do you really think that in the New Testament, in this series of books that is, as Emmett Fox told us, the series of books that is telling us the spiritual psychology, that is telling us about the growth of our soul, do we really think that this parable is in there to justify human greed, taking from the poor and giving to the rich? Or does it have a deeper meaning? Does it have a deeper meaning? And we have to say, to me, that the deeper meaning is about the growth of our soul, the growth of our consciousness. Now we all have we all have unique talents. As individuals, we all have special gifts and special talents. And a lot of times people will look at this, they will look at this parable and they will think, well, what it's talking about is talking about each of us developing the talent that we've been given and finding a way to use that, you know. And that's good. To me, that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's still even a deeper meaning that we need to go explore. So I'm not talking about just the human talents that we have. I'm not talking about the talents that we have for playing music or for song or for dance or maybe for science or maybe for medicine. Those things are good, and there's no doubt in my mind that we should develop those and we should use those. But any human being can do that. I'm talking about the growth of the soul. I'm talking about discovering more of the spirit that is within us. So when it comes to developing talents, this is what I thought was kind of an interesting thing. When it comes to developing talents, we say to ourselves, well, which one should I develop? What should I do? You know, what should I go out there and what should I do? And it's interesting if you stop and think about it that we as human beings have a great range of flexibility of things that we could possibly do, and we could do well if we would do, as Jack Nicklaus said, if we would go out there and dedicate ourselves to the practice. If we would apply ourselves to it, we could do it. Now, I know that many of us, our parents, lived in the greatest generation. They lived through the Second World War, and they were engaged in the Second World War. And if you stop and think about that, I mean, the theme that generation had was we had a job to do. We had a job to do. That was kind of their call. Didn't matter who you were. If you were called up, you had a job to do in the Army or the Navy or whatever branch you were in. They gave you that job, and you did that job, and you didn't complain. That was the job that they gave you to do. If you were given a job to be a cook, you were a cook. If you were given a job to fly an airplane, you flew an airplane. If you were given a rifle and told to run up a beach at Normandy, that's what you did. They did their job. And it was kind of a sign of pride in later years, you know, of that generation. And it had to be done. It had to be done in their mind, and they just went and did it. And if you stop and look at the way that the military made their decisions about who got the jobs, some of it was as completely arbitrary as the physical size of the person. If you were of the right stature to fit into the space that they had to put you, whether it be, you know, the cockpit of a plane or a ball turret on a B-17 or somewhere in a submarine, those kind of things, that's how they decided who went. That's how they decided who went and got those jobs and took those positions. It didn't have a lot to do with what you wanted to do. It didn't have a lot to do with your education, but sometimes it was just simple as if you were underneath 5'2", you got this job because we need short people to go do this job. If you're over 5'7", you go over here because we need taller people to go do this job. And it reminded me of when I was drafted in 1970, 69 or 70, that the Lunar Lander program for Grumman Aerospace, the Lunar Lander program had just been canceled by the government. So there were a lot of people who were working out in Long Island, New York, who had been involved in building the Lunar Lander module. And when the Lunar Lander program got canceled, their draft exemption expired, and they got drafted. So I was in boot camp with guys who were in their late 20s, they were married, they had children, and they were literally rocket scientists who were now being trained to be infantry soldiers in the Army. Everybody in basic training is trained to be an infantry soldier, and after that you go to your specialty. And this one fellow I got to talking with, he was a nuclear engineer. That was his job. He helped design and develop nuclear propulsion systems, and you know, this was his expertise. He had like a PhD in the topic. He was, you know, when it came to those things, he was a lot smarter than certainly I would ever be in that field. And excuse me, the week before we get out of boot camp, they came and told everybody what your specialty was going to be, what job you were going to get in the Army. And they came and told him that he was going to drive a bulldozer. He was a rocket scientist, nuclear engineer. He was going to drive a bulldozer. And the rationale behind it was engineers in the Army drive bulldozers, the Army Corps of Engineers. That's what we need engineers to do. You're an engineer, you're going to go drive a bulldozer. So it just kind of points out, this, it didn't matter who you were, it didn't matter what you knew, there was a job to be done and you would go do it. And when we try to think of our unique gifts and talents, what are my unique gifts and talents, and what should I go do? We have to keep in mind that there are lots of things that we can do. There are lots of things that we can do. And we can probably do well if we will simply take the training and apply ourselves to it. But which one should we do? Which one should we do? What should we go do? What is the thing that we ought to do? And one way to look at it is we probably ought to do, we ought to do that thing which only we can do or we can do best. If there's 100 people in the room, and of the 100 people, we can all do one thing, but there's one thing that only I can do, then perhaps that's the talent that I should develop. And we'll find somebody else who that one thing that everybody can do, that's the thing that they do best. That's the thing that they want to do. So one way to look at it is, why don't we try to do the thing that we could do best instead of wasting our time trying to do that which other people can do. Sometimes things which machines can do better than we can. Then why don't we find that unique talent? Why don't we find the uniqueness? Because maybe that uniqueness is helping us to express a particular way, helping the divine to express a particular way. And if we want to stop and think about this, not as human beings, not about doing more, but about the growth of our soul, if we want to stop and think about this, what is the one thing that we as human beings can do that no other species can do? That as far as we know, no other sentient being can do. And if we can decide that there's something that we are capable of doing that none other can do, maybe that is the talent. Maybe that is the talent that we should develop. That is the talent that we should apply ourselves to. What is it that makes us uniquely human? And how much of our time do we dedicate to exploring our humanness, our uniqueness? If you come home at night and you turn on the news and you watch the news, it's the same pattern every night. It's the same pattern. They have the lead breaking story, and of course, those are all designed to keep you watching TV. The purpose of TV is to keep you watching TV long enough to watch the commercials. That's the purpose of TV. And all the programming on TV is organized that way, and the news is organized that way. So they have the breaking story, and they're going to come in and we'll tell you more about that after the commercial break. So they have the breaking story, and then they have 2 or 3 other stories, and always the last story of the evening, right before they close the news, that's the human interest story. That's the feel-good story. That's the one that brings a smile to our face and gives us back the hope in humanity that we lost while we watched the other 24 minutes of the news show and they told us about all the terrible things that are going on in the world. And if they can have babies or puppies or babies playing with puppies, if they can do that for the last 2 or 3 minutes, well, that's spectacular. But my point is that most of the time that we're watching that program, it is about what's going on. It's about what's being done. It's about the atrocities in the world. And it is not an exploration of our uniqueness, our unique ability to think, our unique ability to think about what we're thinking about, our unique ability to discover the presence of God within us. See, we are called human beings, not human doers, not human laborers, but human beings. And we really do not spend a lot of time discovering what it means to be. What does it mean to be a human being? So I suggest then that what we can do, and by the way, part of the reason for that, not just talking about the news, a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, why don't they have a good news network? Why don't they have a TV network that only shows good news? Why don't they have something that only prints the good stories instead of these scandalous stories, that are not doing a whole lot of good to advance humankind? And there's a reason for it. And the reason for it is people don't watch it. Enough people don't watch it to pay the bills, so they don't do it. There's something in the human condition. There's something in the way that humanity at the human level, not at the spiritual level, thinks and acts, that it requires that drama, it requires that tension, it requires that excitement in order to feel alive. So if we just sat here for 30 minutes in an evening and we showed all of the good things that happened in the world, what the producers believe is everybody would switch the channel. And as I said, TV is about getting you not to switch the channel, but getting you to stay tuned, excuse me, so they can deliver you, the audience, to the advertisers. Excuse me. So if we look at the world around us, what we find is a lot of mindlessness, a lot of things that are being done without thought, being done over and over and over again, habitually, and there's no way for us to get better at what we're doing because we're not thinking about it, we're not observing it, we're not aware of it. There's things that we're just not doing, We are not necessarily on a global scale exploring what makes us unique. What does it mean to be? So that's what I'm talking about when we talk about use it or lose it. If you don't, to them that have, more will be given. To them that do not have, it will be taken away. And it is this consciousness of our spiritual nature. It is this consciousness of what it means to be. It is this consciousness that helps us to move beyond mind, beyond thought and reason, logic and reason, to the experience of the very presence of life. And it's even hard to name because it's the very presence, the I amness of the Old Testament. I am that I am. The suchness of the Buddhists. It just is. It just is. See, we're told in the Old Testament, excuse me, when Moses went to get the commandments and he said to God, he says, who shall I tell the people sent me with these commandments? And the response was, I am that I am. Because that was the highest name for God. Anything other than that kind of started to limit and started to define. And of course, the pure essence of life is without definition. It cannot be limited. In the human way of thinking, if something is one thing, it's not another. Right? We received our logic in the Western world, we received it from the Greeks. And in Greek logic, something is either true or it's false, but it's not both. But there's an older system of logic further to the east that comes to us from India. And that system of logic says, well, a thing might be true, or it might be false. It might be both true and false, or it might be true or false. It might be neither true nor false. Could be true, could be false, could be both, could be neither. And of course to us, that just doesn't make any sense. How can that be? How can that be? If it's a car, it's not a boat. those kind of things. How can it be? But when we start to go back and we start to think of the divine, if we want to start to think of God, if we want to use the word God, if we want to think of life, if we want to think of a first cause, it can't be defined. It is beyond the ability of logic and reason to comprehend. It just can't. So we have to be able to move beyond mind, beyond thought, beyond reason to the experience of the suchness. So the one thing that we can do in our beingness that no other species can do that we know of is we can be aware of our thoughts. We can be aware of what we are thinking. We can become witnesses and observers to our own thoughts, even to the point where we stop to recognizing them as our own. Thought is occurring. Instead of saying, I am having a thought, or I am the thought, is what we usually believe. I witnessed a thought. I observed the thought. There goes a thought. For whom does the thought arise? Where does the thought go when it leaves? So the thoughts, we then become detached from them. And in our mindless state of existence up until now, we have been acting as if the thoughts are us, and we must do whatever the thoughts tell us to do. As Osho says, our mind wanders like a stray dog, and we follow it around town. So the thing that we can do that I suggest that we have lost, or we are in danger of losing because we don't do it deliberately and because we do things mindlessly, what we are losing is our spiritual consciousness. And what is the greatest thing that we can possibly develop in our lives? It is our spiritual consciousness. To him that has, it shall be given. To him that has not, it shall be taken away. What are the things that truly matter most importantly in life? They're spiritual things. Not the physical things. There's nothing wrong with the physical things, but the physical things are only an outpicturing of the spiritual. We spend so much of our time in our lives trying to accumulate wealth. I love the quote that says, I think it's by the Dalai Lama. It says, human beings are funny. We squander our health to get money, and then we squander our money to try to buy our health back. It's not about accumulating stuff. But the most important discovery that we can make while we are here on this planet, the most important discovery that we can make is our beingness, is our spirituality, is the very essence of the presence of the divine within us, expressing as us, expressing through us. And if we want to do that, then we have to ask ourselves, how much time, how much effort, how much attention and awareness, how much mindfulness for those who are on the Wednesday night group, we're studying mindfulness. How much mindfulness am I putting into my being, into my beingness? And the interesting thing is it's not about doing. It's not about getting your spiritual 5-iron out of the bag and going down to the range and banging bucket after bucket of balls until you've hit 5,000. That's the doingness. And sometimes we approach our spiritual life as if we need to do it. We need to do it. We need to force ourselves to do it. We need to meditate a little bit harder. And it's not about that at all. But it's about our willingness. It is about our desire. It is about our intention. Our desire to know God more fully. Our intention to to allow whatever we need to know to be revealed to us, to allow whatever we need to do to be in our guidance, and to follow the heart, to follow the love, to follow that which shows the way. So it's more about an attitude or a state of mind that we are willing to practice, and it's not a practice in a form of rehearsal. It is a practice in the form of a being. To practice being that kind of a person. The kind of a person who is aware, and who is aware that they are aware. The kind of a person who can take a breath every now and then and just observe. Even in the midst of a busy day, take a breath and just observe. To look upon life with gratitude, and to immerse ourselves in the feeling of the goodness of God. To find a practice, whatever that practice might be, whether it be meditation, whether it be a walk on the beach, whether it be observing the sunrise or the sunset. I was reading a little bit this morning about Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau made a point to go live in the woods for 2 years so that he could practice being, observing, feeling his connectedness with all of life. And we're told that there are times where he would just sit in a chair in the doorway of his cottage and he would watch the sun go across the sky for hours. And he didn't want to disrupt the beauty of the moment with any form of work at that time. He was just there. He was just there. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to be outside, maybe out on a boat on the water, or out at a picnic or somewhere out in the open where you've been for a period of hours, and you can actually notice the sun as how it has traversed the sky, how it has moved across the sky while you've been there. But taking the time to simply be, taking the time to simply experience that which we are unique. We are uniquely qualified to observe our thoughts. And yet that is the one thing that we spend the least amount of time doing. So use it or lose it. I would say it comes down to a couple things. Number one is where is our passion? Where is our passion? Are we seeking God as we would be seeking the pond if our hair was on fire? And if not, that's a good place to start. A good place to start is to become aware of our level of desire, to experience our beingness, to set aside our doingness. And as our desire builds, as we can find ways every day to motivate ourselves to love thee more dearly, then it comes down to, with awareness, observing ourselves, observing what we are thinking about, observing what we are talking about, observing what we are doing, and then asking ourselves, is that the way the spiritual being that I know myself to be should act, should think, should behave? Is that which we are engaged in leading us to a greater experience of the presence of God? Is it leading us to a greater awareness of who and what we are as spiritual beings? The other thing that we're told in this parable is that to those that have, it will be given. They will prosper. And I mention this not in a sense of attainment or grasping, but I mention this in a sense of many times people say, well, if I take any time out of my life in order to observe my beingness, in order to think about the nature of my soul, in order to bring myself back to a place beyond time and space and thought, to experience the presence of God, how will I make my living? How will I do that? And of course, most of the time people say that they've never even tried. You know, they've never even tried. Lori and I used to do a Finding Your Life Mission workshop. We help people discover what they wanted to do. And one of the first things they would say when they get there is, well, I don't know, you know, when I figure out what I want to do, nobody's going to pay me to do that. I go, so how do you know? You don't even know what you want to do. How can you be so sure you won't get paid? It's built into our culture to believe that. But what this parable is telling us is that as we develop consciousness, as we become more and more aware of what we are as a being, those things that we need shall be given. It's the same. Seek first the kingdom, and everything else will be given. So I want you to consider this week, what is the most unique thing that we as human beings can do, that you as a human being can do? And I suggest to you it is to discover your spiritual nature, to realize your spiritual nature, and to live your life from that place of knowing that you are a spiritual being. That is the consciousness that I believe the parable is talking about. To he that has, more will be given, because as we have that consciousness, it continues to grow and it continues to develop, and everything that we need for this life is provided. The ideas, the helpmates, the job opportunities, the money, whatever it may be, it is provided. And observe where we spend our time. Where's our time going during the week? And then find ways to just slip in a little bit more of awareness, a little bit more of observation, perhaps a little bit more of meditation. Find ways to increase our desire to know God. Find ways to increase our practice. There's a story about a man who was driving through the country and he got lost, and this was before GPS. So he stopped and he saw an old man wearing bib overalls sitting out on a front porch in a rocking chair, and the fellow went up to his house and asked directions, and he got him. And the fellow said to the man in the overalls, he said, "Are you a farmer?" The guy said, "Yeah." He says, "Is this your farm?" He says, "Oh, yeah. Yeah." He said, "I've been my farm for my whole life." The guy said, well, what are you growing? Are you growing potatoes? And the farmer said, "No." He said, "I grew potatoes once." He says, "They got the blight." He says, "I don't want the blight again. I'm not growing potatoes." So he says, "Were you growing corn?" The guy said, No. He said, "I grew corn one time, and he says, corn got the earworm." He says, "and I lost the whole crop. I don't want that to happen again." And this goes on. Every crop this fellow mentions, "Well, you're growing this, you're growing cotton." "No, the boll we've got the cotton." Every crop he mentions, the guy had an excuse. So finally the farmer said, the fellow who was lost said to the farmer, he says, well, what are you growing?" And the guy says, "Well, this year," he says, "I'm not growing anything. I decided to just play it safe." And sometimes I think we get caught up in that. Is it safe? Is it safe to explore our spiritual nature? And I think what we have to realize is that it is the only safety that we have. It is the only thing that truly matters. If we put our trust completely in the things of the world, we'll be disappointed. Not because the world is such a bad place, but because it's constantly changing. And we have to put our treasure in heaven, as another parable tells us, where things things don't rust and the moths don't get them. Put our treasure in heaven. Put our treasure in our spiritual nature. So I invite you this week, take time to be. Take time to use the God-given talent that you have to observe, to discover, to reflect. Take time to see the miracle that God is working through you and as you and around you. Take the time to just be with the presence of God. And then go into the world and do your activities. We have enough doers in the world. We have enough people to go out and do whatever it is that needs to be done. We don't have enough beers. I invite you to become one of the beings, and so it is.